Good evening. Planning Board is now in session on this beautiful evening. First item on the agenda is a discussion item on the master plan update. Go to the town planner first, and she can either speak or refer to someone else.
I'll refer to Mimi. That group's been doing great progress, I think, because there's a lot of information that's happening, and Mimi's really managing it all and keeping us all in the loop on top of it with emails and agendas and all that. So, but she has more specifics about, especially annual town meeting, maybe a small presentation. Okay.
Mrs. Luttrell.
Not really much to update from the last time. Our next meeting is Wednesday at the Senior Center at 7:30. Come one, come all. But we will be doing a update for town meeting, just a quick where we are and what the master plan is, where we are and where we're going. That's all I have.
At this point, do you feel comfortable with the pace? You know, the amount of time and the pace of the progress? And the also the second question would be the quality of the product so far.
I think everyone would always want things to move faster, but we're trying to really reach out and gather a lot of information from a lot of different areas, and that takes time. But I think we're on schedule.
I think part of the process is when there's an initiative to take the next step, you always have to wait for the next meeting, and so the committee approves going forward with it. For example, the survey, the outreach survey that's coming up, right? That took a couple meetings to define, refine, and then vote on this is what we want to go out. But I think at the next meeting, you said that was going to happen. Right. So there'll be this great survey that people can respond to, and we'll try and help get it out there for feedback.
Anything else? Any other questions, comments on that item? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is a public hearing, annual town meeting warrant article to amend section 174-10, site plan approval. This public hearing started on January 27th, was continued to February 10th and February 24th, and to tonight. Call on the town planner to give us the update.
Okay, in the meantime, since the last public hearing, on Tuesday, February 25th, the Board of Selectmen voted to support the warrant article amending the site plan approval at their meeting. So that's a good step. On tomorrow is the advisory meeting, right? March 10th. Trying to figure out where I am. March 10th is an advisory meeting where the bylaws are going to be discussed. Mimi's going to talk about the site plan, and Marnie's going to be there to discuss the lighting bylaw, to answer any questions they have. And then there's a moderators meeting, a annual town meeting on, just remind me, that's tomorrow as well. So after, before the advisory meeting is the the moderators meeting, the pre-ATM moderators meeting. Sorry, I was getting confused. I was like, what day is it today? Hold on.
So give us the times on those meetings.
Oh, sure, and I have them right here. So we posted Tuesday, March 10th at 6 p.m. is the pre-ATM meeting with the moderator to do a kind of an administrative review of the process, where they'll talk about the motion that's required, the vote that's required to carry, and the moderator has a chance to speak to each presenter. And then at 7 p.m. at the Public Safety Building, we posted a joint meeting with the Advisory Committee for the Southborough Planning Board at 7 p.m. So the moderator's meeting at 6 here at the town hall, and then the advisory meeting will be at the public safety building in the public meeting room there at 7.
7:30? Oh, 7.
7.
So that means we have to be finished with the town meeting dry run with moderator within an hour.
Yeah, it usually runs pretty quickly if I recall, because,
Yeah, I think you're right.
yeah, and they'll give you a time, a deadline for any presentation materials so that IT can get it on their system and have it already all queued in. So if you have it ready for tomorrow, or they'll tell you the deadline on that.
So back to the public hearing, the reason we're going over this is because this is one of the articles that will be part of the dry run with the moderator, and also subject to discussion with advisory a little later on.
Correct. And let me see if there's any other information here. That site plan review will require 2/3 vote, town meeting.
And tell us why?
Zoning, yes. Trick question. Deer in the headlight, look for a second.
You
Sorry.
had it.
Zoning, because it's a bylaw change, it's a zoning bylaw change, so it requires 2/3 vote at annual town meeting, and this planning board public hearing before that. So, that one's looking good.
Any questions or comments from the board? Has anyone approached any of us about this warrant article out in our world?
No.
Anyone from the public? Okay, looks like no more on that one tonight. Mr. Mills?
Make a motion, we continue the public hearing for annual town meeting warrant article. Amend section 174-10, site plan approval, that we continue to March 23rd, 2020 at 7:05 PM.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Public hearing is continued. Next item on the agenda tonight is a continued public hearing for a town meeting warrant article to amend section 174-9, special permit requirements, and 174-19, extensions or alterations. This public hearing began on January 27th, was continued to February 10th, February 24th, and to tonight. We'll ask the town planner to update us on this warrant article.
Similar to the site plan approval bylaw change, the same holds true that tomorrow, March 10th, will be in pre-ATM moderators meeting at 6 PM, followed by the advisory meeting at the Public Safety Building at 7 PM. Same process. And this was the zoning. So I believe the Zoning Board of Appeals already voted to, to push this forward. And wasn't there another meeting, Sarah, where anyone was going to attend for this, or that's not this one?
They didn't reach out to say that they would attend again to the,
Right, right. So Wednesday, March 18th, there's an
Right,
outreach for lighting.
right.
Never mind. There's not an
right,
outreach for this one.
lighting.
That's it.
The lighting working group is gonna go to their meeting on the 18th to
Right.
talk about lighting, but,
Not this one.
in
This
terms
one's
of their
already done.
engagement for this warrant article, I think feel like they're
Okay.
done,
Yeah, sorry, just a little tired.
lack of a better word.
So that's it for this zoning bylaw change, which also requires 2/3 vote at town meeting.
So without going through in detail like we have during the previous continued public hearings, could either you, Karina, or Sarah, just in a few sentences, tell the public, remind us what is being changed relative to the special permit requirements in 174-9, and what's being changed in extensions or alterations in 174-19.
Sure. So in 174-9, it's giving clarification that a one-to-one replacement of an existing non-conforming structure does not require a special permit. And it also lays out what will require a special permit, those thresholds that'll mark, that need. And then in 174-19, it again clarifies what is considered an extension, alteration, or otherwise structural change is the addition to that section.
Very good. You're always ready. Any questions or comments? None from the board. Anyone from the public?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, we continue the public hearing for annual town meeting warrant article amend section 174-9 special permit requirements and 174-19 extensions or alterations to March 23rd, 2020 at 7:10 p.m.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Public hearing is continued. The next item on the agenda is a continued public hearing for town meeting warrant article to update section 174-12.1, outdoor illumination. This public hearing began on January 27th, was continued to February 10th and February 24th, and to tonight. We'll ask the town planner to give us the update on this warrant article.
You'll note in your packet right behind the agenda is a draft bylaw. On that are some minor modifications which Sarah is going to go over and let you know what they mean.
Just gonna pull it up here.
And just while she's doing that, some of these changes came about from Board of Selectmen's review at their prior meeting, and some other discussions.
Oh, I have it. So up on the screen, we'll call attention to section C, enforcement. So at the Board of Selectmen meeting, there was kind of a significant concern about the enforcement clause that's currently written in the bylaw. So it was suggested that the preliminary section, that top section, be stricken and just leave in the reference to violations of this bylaw shall be subject to the provisions of the Town of Southborough Article 3 entitled Use Regulations, Section 174-24 thereof entitled Enforcement Procedures, Violations, and Penalties. Since that section, 174-24, does lay out penalties and enforcement procedures, they felt as though that was sufficient in terms of a reference for enforcement. The lighting bylaw working group discussed it and was agreeable to removing that section that was originally placed there. So that's why it's stricken in red. The other very small amendment is under the community outdoor sports and recreation lighting requirements, section K, subsection 1. So the correlated color temperature may not exceed 4,000 Kelvin is how it was originally written. However, we've changed it to 5,700 because that is an industry standard via IDA and EIES. Thank you. So that's an acceptable standard by both of those regulating entities. So we, just kind of made that modification. The 4,000 Kelvin is obviously preferred to keep that correlated color temperature down, to keep those health risks down, especially for younger children playing under those lights. But since the industry standard is set at 5,700, we weren't trying to make it overly restrictive in case there was some sort of project perhaps proposed in town that might require lighting, of a semi-pro level at some point. So those are the only two changes. At this point, since the warrant article has gone to print, they will have to be made at town meeting on the floor. So the lighting bylaw working group is gonna, get the paperwork and all the procedures together to get that done.
And just to query that, in preparation for town meeting, if the board is in favor of these two changes, maybe a little guidance on what we need to prepare, probably, because I believe when you make an amendment, you have to pass a document in so that they can type it up.
Marnie's familiar with that process.
Oh, you
so.
are, okay.
Do we type it up, or we type it up? That's what I thought. So you would,
So the first change is what the Board of Selectmen, it's their desire to remove this paragraph
Correct.
under enforcement. And then the second one, again, is just the industry standard, which is defendable at this point. Because it is a somewhat new understanding. But basically, the lighting bylaw hasn't really changed that much. It's the technical review part behind
Right.
it.
so the amendment would be to strike the words after C, enforcement, and replace it with nothing.
No, what it would do is strike that first paragraph, and then the subsection 1, the violations clause that reads, violations of this bylaw shall, will move up and replace the paragraph that's being stricken.
So there'll be no number 1,
Right.
so we should strike that also.
Yeah, that's a formatting thing, but yeah, I can do that.
There's professionals in the audience who take great pride in
Absolutely.
picking those little things up.
Absolutely.
And then the other amendment would be to strike the number 4,000 and replace it with the number 5,700.
Yes.
So just to clarify, that's just for sporting?
Yes,
It's
that's
still
that's just for sporting. It's only
Two to
applicable to sporting.
3,000 for
Yep.
everything else?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. And again, the sporting is a higher threshold for the color rendering on the field and for that visual reference when it comes to like baseball, especially the speed and accuracy of the ball.
Any questions or comments from the board? Mr. Stein?
So subsection on this bylaw was 1. Now it's just going to be referencing 174-24,
Yes.
which Ms. Luttrell was kind enough to bring the code, which was great, thank you. And never leave home without it. So 1724 is a pretty broad clause on enforcement.
Yes.
The thing about removing the language that's in the bylaw currently is it's very specific to the spirit of the bylaw.
Yes.
In terms of the enforcement, in terms of the measurements and stuff like that. So I'm just a little concerned, maybe I'm nitpicking, but removing that detail and leaving it with just a reference to the enforcement procedures for the whole code, the rest of the town code, I think that there's a little bit of a gap
Yeah, I agree.
If I could, did you want to go, Barney? I had a brief conversation with the Board of Selectmen Chair, Mr. Shea, over the weekend, and we talked about this a little bit, and he indicated that he had given some feedback regarding a concern about, his driveway light, casting light onto the neighbor, and that seems to be kind of a general concern of people if, when they turn the light on, are the police going to be there in a few minutes? And most likely, I think everyone feels that that wouldn't happen, but if you happen to have, an issue not related to lighting, but with a neighbor, that could be weaponized between the two neighbors. So, I agree with Mr. Stein that you want to, have appropriate levels of enforcement for this new lighting bylaw, outdoor illumination, but it would seem that we would, if we could get this passed, it's a great step forward. It's excellent progress. And then see how the enforcement piece, see how it works for a while. And if it becomes a big problem, then like any other rules that we impose, we can adjust it at a future date. And if that adjustment means a more detailed, specific enforcement, then we could try that. I think this seemed to be like an attempt to calm people's concerns about, being in non-compliance.
Yeah, sir. It's interesting, by that example, a neighbor shines a light inadvertently onto another neighbor's property and the police are called. In that scenario, the defendant, quote unquote, the person who shined the light, would have quite a bit of protection given the language that's currently in the bylaw, which was very specific in terms of referencing what constitutes a legitimate complaint. And I feel that actually removing that sort of removes protection for the light shiner and makes it much more broad in terms of, well, I think you're breaking the law, so therefore I'm going to report it. And see, it's right here in 174-24, you owe $300 a day to the town until otherwise proven. So I'm not sure if I agree with the logic behind that. If that's the argument, is to mitigate and reduce claims, I don't see how removing that actually accomplishes that.
So I am in favor of removing it for the points that Mr. Morris has stated. I think the feedback from the Board of Selectmen was, in the spirit of Southborough as a town, this is very detailed and very heavy-handed was the word that was used. And I don't think that was the spirit of writing this. We pulled in language from Pepperell. We lifted what they used. And I think the feedback was, I didn't get a warm and fuzzy feeling if we kept this in that we would have the support of the Board of Selectmen. And I think in the spirit of what we're trying to do in the bigger world of environmental protection and also to kind of trailblaze better lighting in our community, let's first start with in the spirit of people collaborating and working together. And then to Mr. Morris's point, if it comes down to an enforcement needs to be very specific, then I think we could then write that in. But we've worked very hard on this. We've done a lot of research, and we would really like to have the public support this. And I think without the heavy-handedness in there, I think that we have a better chance of the community realizing the benefits of this bylaw. Thank you.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sarah, can I just ask, is that paragraph
Yeah.
is not in the current bylaw?
No.
This was added.
Yes.
in the draft and now be, the intent is to strike it from the draft. Okay.
Right.
So it's not in the original.
No.
Okay.
Like most warrant articles, whether they're zoning or, anything else, it's an art and it's a science to be able to be prepared to give a decent presentation so that people can understand what they're voting on, and a comfort level that to what extent the new rule will impact their lives. So this is probably good that the people, this amendment would have to be voted on separately or combined with the 5,700. So in the process of doing that, it may prompt, the people will see the red letter, the red wording here, and may come to the same conclusion that Mr. Stein says, that this, leaving this in gives them a more of a comfort level, in which case, if the room feels that way, then the motion to amend would fail, and this red lettering would stay in there. And so it should prompt a discussion and maybe get people's feelings about whether it's there or not. We'll see what happens, but the way we're moving forward, it could, if it stays in, it may cause it to be passed. If it gets removed, it may result in the warrant article to be passed. We'll see. Any other questions or comments?
I have just a quick rundown, something, just to outline some of the outreach that was done on the efforts of the working group. There was an article on February 25th in mysouthborough.com explaining the bylaw with links to the web page on the planning board website that has frequently asked questions, the bylaw, the regulations that are drafted, and other documents, the backup information. So that was a great thing. On Monday, the 25th, I went to the Recreation Commission meeting to try and give some outreach there. On February 26th, there was an outreach. There was outreach at the senior center, specific time frame that was set up. Moderator's meeting, and then there's on March 11th, that's this Wednesday, there's an outreach meeting at the senior center again with Sarah.
It's at the library.
Oh, at the library this time, okay, switched. Okay, and Sarah, you have a flyer that went out in email for that. And then again, at March 18th, there'll be outreach at the ZBA by Sarah for the lighting bylaw.
Yep.
And then again, on March 26th, outreach at the senior center.
Yep.
The last one, okay.
Last one.
So there's a big effort to get the word out. Marnie and Sarah and Destin have been hitting everywhere they can and providing information on the website and all that, so it's really good.
I did attempt to make the Board of Health meeting, and I was provided a window of time and unfortunately had adjourned before I got there. But I did share the information through their information. You send a contact us, and I sent all the links there. So I thought it was important for the Board of Health also to have awareness, considering it's an American Medical Association guidelines that we were adopting here.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments from the board tonight? Anyone from the public?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mills.
I make a motion we continue the public hearing for annual town meeting warrant article to update section 174-12.1 outdoor illumination to March 23rd, 2020 at 7:15 p.m.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Public hearing is continued. Next item on the agenda is a discussion item regarding the engineering review consultant, which is Fuss & O'Neill, contract extension. I'll turn it over to the town planner to get us started.
In December of 2019, Fuss and O'Neill's engineering review on-call engineering services contract technically expired. However, we're working under task authorizations that were previously signed under that contract. So it's time to get a contract extension. The last planning board meeting, we talked about it, and there were some questions from the planning board regarding insurance and landscaping and open space topics from prior reviews. So we asked Dan to attend this evening so that he could speak directly to it, plus we get a chance to meet him. Usually we're working face-to-face with Amy and some of the inspectors, and Dan we correspond with on the phone and email pretty regularly, so here he is.
Here I am. So,
Dan,
yeah,
welcome back.
good to see you, Don.
Good to
see
see you.
everyone.
Thanks for showing up tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry I couldn't make the previous meeting. I was not working this school vacation week there.
Did you go to Italy or?
No. I just got on the cruise ship and rode it around. a little bit.
It's funny now, but maybe
Yeah,
not
yeah.
later, yeah.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Went for a hike in my my hometown. So
Did you want to start off with a statement, or did you just want to get questions?
sure. I mean, I just want to avail myself for any questions. We've we've been providing the peer review services to the town now since 2006, I believe. So, we've got quite a bit of experience over the years with a lot of the folks here, and just things going on in the town. So it's definitely a relationship we value pretty highly. So I wanted to make sure I was here to answer any questions. If there's things, I know Karina had mentioned a few things with the landscaping, that there's stuff that you would like us to focus more on. I want to make sure that gets noted, and we can make sure that we, are meeting our expectations. I know things ebb and flow throughout the years, and about what's the biggest priority for the board and things to focus on. So I want to make sure I know what those are and can relay them to my team, Amy, and the rest of the folks. So make sure we take care of you.
I also just want to point out quickly that I spoke with Mark Purple, town administrator, and he had good things to say and was pleased with Fuss and O'Neill's work. Also, the Conservation Commission and the conservation agent as well said the same thing, so we checked around. And-
Background check on me.
Yeah.
Well, if you remember back, I mean, it's just, if we're talking 2006, I mean, there was always landscaping requirements in the site
Mhm.
plan and the, the plan reviews, subdivision, all that stuff. But since we've had a couple of new members on the board, the emphasis has really, not just on the board, but on the Open Space Commission, it's formed like an excellent self-taught little subgroup that has really put a lot more emphasis on native plants
Mhm.
and the landscaping component. And I think people are noticing that when the developers come in, it's kind of an eye-opener for them. But for the most part, they're willing to comply, and it's kind of gone in that direction. So
Mhm.
it is a new emphasis
Sure.
compared to, back 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, and I know that the street tree policy, I know there's just in the town in general, there's just a bigger emphasis put on that, and industry-wide, there's a much bigger emphasis. Not, there was a lot of times it was focused, just make sure you don't use invasives, but now the push is well beyond that to make sure we're focusing on native, and even native to within, at the county level. I mean, what we plant in the Berkshires and the hills is different than what we would plant here, so it's a much bigger emphasis now. And we do have landscape architects on staff in my office that work with us, that work with me, so that's something we can definitely focus on more and make sure that we, especially in terms of the natives, to make sure that we are screening everything for not just that we're not, we're catching the invasives and making sure there's no invasives. I think the focus should be as much on the natives. You know, it's always been make sure we don't have anything on the bad list, but we got to make sure we study the good list too and really promote those. So that's definitely something that we can focus on.
Very good. Open it up to the board. Did you want to go, Mr. Mills?
Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
My question, I don't know, did you relay my question already? To,
Yes, I did, but you should say it in your words.
okay. So it was more around the liability coverage.
Mhm.
And I was thinking with some of the projects that are now coming or have come before us, some are a lot bigger than they used to be. And my concern was if something were to, say, get missed or, you know, ways down the line, you know, a large project, if the town is getting sued or anything like that, if there's enough coverage on your side, if you were to get sued to cover
Mhm.
the project or whatever it was.
Sure.
Now, I haven't been in that situation. I'm just trying to think, you know, make sure the town's covered appropriately. So I didn't know if what was in there needed to flex maybe sometimes during certain projects or
Mhm.
how it works.
Yeah, I talked to Karina a little bit about that, and we have several kind of layered policies in terms of, you know, our general liability is the $5 million number. And then we have an umbrella liability policy that's up to $15 million that, you know, covers anything liability-wise within the company. Most of our liability comes, or would come on the design side, and most of the liability I think you're concerned with, and any of that liability would go with the designer of the project, and not necessarily with us or even the town as the reviewer. Most of the time, the town, if they're involved in a lawsuit, it would be typically because you did not approve something on a certain grounds, or approve something that didn't meet the regulations. I've never been involved in anything where we got sued through the town for, say, you know, a grading error or an issue on a site. That would always default to the engineer of record on the job, which, you know, could be any of the engineers of record, which we are on a lot of our other business, but that's typically the default. But the one place that I did talk to Karina about is we do inspections on behalf of the town, you know, whether it's for a bond reduction or we typically inspect road subbase and all that. So, and that's the one place we would potentially have liability if we miss something in that realm. But that would, you know, fall well within that would be covered by our general professional liability. And
Thank you. That was my question.
Mr. Stein?
Mr. Delaney,
yes, sir.
nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
You've been our consultant since I've been on the board. I've been very happy with the work.
Thank you.
Certainly, it seems like your expertise as a group is on engineering, wastewater management, lid. I wonder if you feel that you have the same level of expertise with zoning and open space. You know, do you feel like your command of the town code is as strong as your command of, you know, engineering practices and such?
I would say our, you know, personally, Dan Delaney's comfort level or my training is on the engineering side, is on more on the hard engineering. We do have planning staff that if there was something specific, we would draw on their experience and rely on them. Most of our review focuses typically on the engineering issues. So that's where we do spend most of our time. So I would say we probably spend a large percentage of our effort on that. Most of the time, if there was a specific issue with the zoning code, we would be discussing it specifically with Karina ahead of time. Typically, we try and flesh that out right away, so we're not arguing about it throughout. We have a similar thing that comes up with conservation, more so typically on the wetlands delineation side and whatnot, where, you know, we try and get that out even ahead of filing if we can, if we see something, because those are usually deal breakers. So typically by the time it gets to us reviewing, we would, you know, if there's something that's really controversial or if they're, you know, pushing the limits on a particular regulation, we would hope to have fleshed that out ahead of time. I know there's been some ZBA, I can think back, I know Park Central's one, there's been some ZBA reviews that have come up that are probably more in that realm, and where we have drawn on our in-house planning staff for help on those.
Right. And thank you for that answer.
Sure.
So it's just interesting that responsibilities of the town is 3 paragraphs, scope of services is 1 paragraph, and it says within that, specific scope of services and budgets will be negotiated for each assignment. Do you feel comfortable with that? I mean, that's very sort of broad, open-ended language as far as what we can expect from you. I think that's sort of what I'm driving at is like, what are fair expectations of you? Should we expect you to be, as, you know, the same level of expertise on open space as you are on the lid?
I do think it comes down to what's important to the board, and if that is important to you, especially on a case-by-case basis, I think any consultant's going to have a strength, or, you know, varying strengths, and I wouldn't call it a weakness, but, you know, an area where they're less strength. But on a case-by-case basis, if there's something that specifically, you know, drives the need for something that, you know, wouldn't be I don't want to say a run-of-the-mill review, but a lot of them are pretty similar, then I think you should have the expectation that we know that, and we would need to go get our people, or even, you know, if something specialized, to, you know, hire a sub-consultant. I know we've worked in the past with zoning sub-consultants, when it was a long time ago now, and one of the original changes to the zoning bylaw, probably about 10 or 11 years ago, where we actually worked for that firm. We made the introduction and then just provided a part of that. So I would say, you know, from your standpoint, I think you have the right to expect us to know anything you need us to know, and it's our job to go find it, whether it's in-house. And I can tell you, a vast majority of it we would definitely have in-house.
Yeah.
But, you know, if there's a market, you know, we work with companies that do, you know, market assessments, things like that, where we don't have the financial side of a market assessment in-house, but, you know, we can look at the zoning and do all of that, but we might not know how to do a pro forma, you know, not for you folks, but just an example. Or we would bring that person onto our team and have them, you know, help us out. So,
Thanks, Dan.
sure.
Mrs. Luttrell.
Thank you.
Sure.
You didn't come all the way from Springfield, did you?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's an easy drive. It's just set it and forget it.
A long
Nice
one,
and
though.
smooth.
Well, then thank you again, doubly thank you.
problem.
So just taking off from what Mr. Stein, just so I understand, when you review a project, you review it against zoning, don't you, to make sure that it complies with zoning?
Yep, yeah, we definitely do, yep.
Okay.
We review it against zoning. I took Mr. Stein's question to be if there was a specific zoning concern beyond obviously reviewing against the regulations. We review generally line by line against the regulations, so we go section by section and try and reflect that in the letter. So that's what we'll have, you know, section 174 dash blah, 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 right, in each letter. So we do that. I think I was speaking more to the, you know, Mr. Stein's question about, you know, the expertise level. If there was something very specific, you know, if somebody was looking for a waiver that maybe we weren't comfortable with what they were asking, or the board wasn't comfortable with what they were asking, then they could ask us to look into it deeper. But yeah, we know the code very well.
Okay,
So,
well, that's what I thought, so I was a little confused. And then the other question on inspections.
Mhm.
So are you making sure that what's being built is the same that's on the site plan, or are you just focusing on roads and culverts and
So
stormwater, or?
yeah, our the review work or the inspection work we do for the town almost always has exclusively to do with a public right-of-way or a future public right-of-way. So on a subdivision or any work that's going to be done that would eventually become property of the town, Most of the time, it's a subdivision road or an intersection improvement associated with like a private development. So we'll go out and inspect it on behalf of the town to make sure it meets the design requirements of the town or what was approved. We make sure what was approved meets the design requirements of the town, then we go out and make sure. And typically that's pavement, subbase, storm drainage, the design of the stormwater basins, and then other utilities. There's been a couple of instances where we've been hired to do some inspections on private jobs, and I'm looking at Marnie because I know we got hired by the Concom to do basically a third-party inspection on Clifford Road when they had that big erosion issue from that private development, because the town felt that wasn't being done by the applicant. So, obviously there's a funding issue with that, and that's pretty atypical, but it's something we'd be happy to do. But most of the time, our work is basically limited to what's within the public right-of-way or what's going to be a future public right-of-way to kind of protect the interests of the town.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mrs. Houlihan.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan, for coming.
Sure.
I agree. It's a long drive, so we appreciate it.
Beats going to Pittsfield, though, so I go that way too a lot, so I'll take this one any day.
So I know we had a discussion when you weren't here, and I think one of the key questions, and I think it comes back to Mrs. Luttrell's question, is more around, so it's, I guess, for like a bond reduction. So what came up last week or whenever we were here last was the bond reduction. And so the question was, would you come and look at the plan that was approved and what they've done against the plan? And so I think in our mind, it was just clarity. Is that, and so that's where the did they actually plant what they said they were going to plant? Is that actually there in order for us to grant the bond reduction? And so there was a discrepancy, and so further work needs to still be done, but we didn't know if that was your job requirement or if that's something we could scope into the job requirement.
That's a good question, and it's kind of a very muddy, kind of a gray area. Most of the bond reduction is almost always geared towards, like I said, the work within the public right of way, because that's typically what the public improvement bond, that's what the town typically has the legal right to have that encumbered by the applicant and to make sure that they have bonded that work. So if they flake on it, for lack of a better term, then you can finish building the road. But it does beg the question, what happens outside of, that imaginary line on a plan? And a lot of times, that doesn't fall directly within that bond reduction letter, but it is part of the approved plan. So that most of the time we are, and we're asked to go out and the bond reduction just involves that area. And if there are glaring other things, we'll often note them. But it's definitely something that we can do. It's an added cost, obviously, to the town to have us do that. Typically, a lot of towns would put that back on the applicant and say, we won't give you your CO until you've done this. So you prove it to us. So, those two approaches, but it's definitely something we can do. In the past, most of the time, we've been asked specifically to do the initial bond for the public improvements, and then the reductions usually at the end of the construction season. There is kind of another gray area, which there's sometimes when if you approve something with a special condition that they have to do X, Y, Z, a lot of times that'll get lumped into the bond too. So that's another place that we would, if something was a special condition, we would look at that.
Okay.
Can I just add to that, for clarity? Bond reduction is somewhat different than having the consultant go out and inspect for as-built condition, right? So you have a approved site plan or subdivision plan. In the end, it has to be built according to the approved plan. But what's bonded is not necessarily the same as what's on the approved plan. For example, if there's landscaping that is outside of what the town would be required to replace, and it's not conditioned to be there specifically, that would be picked up in a final inspection of the subdivision for the as-built, I would think.
Yeah, a lot of times at the end of a project, what they would do is provide an as-built survey where they should have gone out and located everything that was done. And then we would compare that to what was approved and then do a site visit and just make sure what's depicted on their as-built really is as-built. So, and the kind of the best example would be if you had a commercial development like a CVS or something, and the road leading into it would be the public road. The improvements that would get bonded would be on that, but there may be landscaping around, the building itself that wouldn't necessarily be bonded. There wouldn't be money held in escrow for it, but the site plan wouldn't be complete until that work was done. So that's usually, I don't know if that explains it a little differently, but that's basically what we are doing.
I think the issue is, a bond hearing is just the most convenient way for us to expedite a
Yep.
thorough review of the project to that point. I mean, if we waited on something like landscaping, it's true that for the final C of O, the developer's gotta meet those guidelines, but it just so happens that if it comes up at a hearing, for the bond reduction,
Yeah.
it comes up.
Yeah,
And we
no,
want to
definitely.
address it then. So I think that's where Ms. Houlihan's question kind of brings to light, like maybe something to think about how you guys
Sure.
can, maybe when you're going into a bond reduction visit and review, just be cognizant that if stuff
Yeah, I
may be
mean-
coming up that,
It's a very easy thing for us to add on. If we're already going to go out and provide a letter, there's no reason we couldn't put a supplementary memo, just a one-pager that says, while on site, although these items are not included in the bond reduction, we noted that, X, Y, Z, we can make however many notes we need. And that's something, if we're already doing the site visit, we're already putting a letter together, it probably adds an hour or two onto the whole exercise to, depending on the site. I mean, if it's an enormous site, it might take a little longer, but that's something that I would have no issue doing as part of the work, if that would be helpful to the board.
I'd ask the chairman, because it does seem like in these bond reductions, we always have so much leeway. Like, as you've said, oftentimes, we could do zero, we could give it all back, and we can give anything in between. So there's so much leeway, it just gives us such that opportunity to.
Yeah, I mean, if you try to capture every single thing, then that list would be, very detailed, and it doesn't have to be, because we do have that, we have the authority. And we've also have a track record of making sure, or trying to make sure, that what we approved is what was built. And again, we always have a line item for as-bills. Sometimes we don't have any line item for landscaping, depending on the nature of the project. But let's say there's landscaping, and then it's all done, job's all done, as-bills get submitted, developer wants his 5,000 that we're holding for his as-bills. And we say, well, the landscaping, it all died. Well, I put it in, but that's not on the list. Well, it is now. We have that authority. So the 5,000 that he should get for his as-bills all of a sudden become 5,000 for the $2,000 of landscaping that died. We have that authority. Back in the 80s, it was a lot looser, and some of these subdivisions failed. The developers went out of business before they finished them, and in one case, the town had to finish the drainage and part of the road work. So we've always tried to make sure that we do what we're elected to do, which is to protect the interests of the town. And if that means, if the developer thinks that we're being, not fair, we just remind ourselves of what if they disappear? What if they take off? And most of the developers we deal with would never be concerned about that, but it has happened. And so our job is to protect the interests of the town, and we use that flexibility to get us there. And we shouldn't feel bad about it. Yes,
Sorry, just one more question, and I guess this is more my naivete of being on the board. So you said there's a submission for the as-built. So once we've approved a plan, they build it, they submit something for compare and contrast. So I guess from the process, I haven't been here yet for one of those to see that through, but is that like the photometric plan? Is someone going to go by and check to make sure there's no wall packs or there's no lights that are greater than 90 degrees? Because we have developments in town that have that stuff on it, and it's forbidden, and yet they're still there. So are there those types of things that can be added into that as-built audit, or that is Fuss and O'Neill part of that process, or is it done then? They submit it, and it's we have now their as-built plan. How does that work?
It's not just the as-bills. There's a line item, there's a dollar amount attached to the as-bills, which is a roll of plans that is, at times, invaluable. There's no number you can put on it, because if you don't have that, it'll cost a lot of money to create a set of plans that reflects exactly what was built. And a lot of times, there's things that are different than what we approved, because the building inspector may say, yeah, we had to move that driveway over because there was some ledge there. Or we had to delete that hydrant. Fire chief said it was redundant, so we deleted it. But it's on the approved site plan. But then we trace it back and we say, okay, the people in authority at the time made those changes. So it's not just a line item for that. Now, on all of our bond lists, we have, what is it, a 10%?
Yeah,
And
10%
that's
contingency.
an additional amount that's not necessarily assigned to anything, but it's kind of assigned to the fact that maybe we missed some things. Or maybe the number that we assign to it, putting in the bounds at the changes in direction, the steel rods or the concrete
The monuments,
bounds.
the granite monuments. and
Oh,
stuff.
that'll only cost $1,000 to do that. And then the guy that's supposed to do that disappears. And then the developer comes in and he says, oh, I can't do that, it's gonna cost 10 grand. Well, too bad. And we may only be carrying $1,000 for that, because we relied on the original estimate was based on the guy that was already there, that had all the plans, had the ability to do it. And now he's disappeared, and then somebody else has got to go out and resurvey it. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of work. So the board should not be, we shouldn't be holding a vast amount of money because we're overly concerned about protecting the town. It's a balance between making sure that we have enough to protect the interests of the town, but also that we release, that the amount that release it back to the developer is manageable, and that the amount that we retain as time goes by still protects the interest of the town. I mean, we've known that there's been developers that have come in here and they just forgot about it. And it'd be like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the job would be almost all done, and the developer would come in and say, gee, I forgot all about it. And those are the type of developers that are either not that concerned about money, but more concerned about having fun, or they make so much money that it's a relatively insignificant amount, and it eventually catches up to them. We've seen it all over the place.
But my question was, how do we know that they've actually complied with our rules and regulations and zoning? So I know you guys do the lid and all the engineering. How do we know that they've complied with they didn't put wall packs in? Like, what is it that we have, and does Fuss and O'Neill play a role in that? Is that part of the scope of work that they can provide?
Yes.
We would, yeah. The short answer is yeah. We would, wall packs would actually be more on the building inspector side. We would basically take up to the building. But yeah, we would look at, exterior lighting, because I know that came up. We would count the fixtures, make sure they were basically the right height and what was on the plans. And then, the things we wouldn't necessarily know would be, like you said, with the wall packs, we don't often look at the building itself, but that should have been taken care of by the building inspector. But anything in the exterior, we would, in that as-built review, we would go back and look, and we, make sure the right number there, they're in the right place. And things do move off. I mean, you'll see an as-built, even if you can't see it with your eye, you'll get the as-built back and lay one over the other, and, things change. And we would look at it from there and say, well, what's different, and, how big of a difference is it? And then we'd bring it up to Karina, and most of the time, there aren't huge changes, but there's always something.
Some of these also don't get elevations with your plans. So you'll get site plans, but you don't necessarily get building elevations until the construction set is completed. So, other boards might see the elevations, for example. But here, it's the site plan itself. So, sorry.
It's always been somewhat of a team effort, as Dan says. They'll look at things he said that they look at, but most of the time, there's one or two planning board members who have interest in the storm drainage, and they'll physically take the plan and go out there to the site when it's almost done or while it's being built and focus in on that. Same with the lighting. And a board member may say, hey, that's a wall pack that they put up there, and everybody else missed it. Or the building inspector. Sometimes, and we've had several building inspectors, and some of them are, keyed in on those specific things, and then other building inspectors say, no, I'm only concerned with the inside of the building and the underground utilities. So it's a team effort, and also, going back to what you're saying, we've seen it where the project's complete, and it's a ladybug. Oh, I'm gonna have good luck. And then after it's all done, within the next year, there's some new lights put up. The owner or the tenant calls an electrician and says, can you put in a wall pack over there? And then it just shows up. And if we're not vigilant, it stays up. And that's happened, especially on Route 9.
That and signs. Signs are the other big one.
Yeah.
You sign regulation, you build a small sign, and then, you come in and lease it, and the guy's like, I want a huge sign for my business, and it gets built, and then you don't notice it until you drive by. But a lot of times there's a little of that after the fact, especially with the stuff that you can easily do and you wouldn't think of, like the electrical or things like that.
So, Dan, you were saying earlier about if you don't have the expertise, you go find it. We've had, for example, artificial turf fields being proposed in town by proponents that are not the town. It's a privately owned field. And there's always drainage concerns and parking and traffic flow and pedestrian flow. And those are the things that we would look at in the site plan. If it's a privately owned field, does Fuss and O'Neill analyze if the ground-up tires below the turf is just tires, or is there coal ash in there? You don't do that unless we ask you to. And then if we ask you to, and you don't have a turf field person on staff, then you would go find one.
Correct, yeah. In that case, we actually have quite a bit of expertise in that, but yes. We actually for Berkshire Community College, we ended up as part of there was a lawsuit between an environmental group and the college, and we provided expert testimony on behalf of DEP and the construction of it, and it was kind of an interesting court case. But
So let's say the town wants to build which we have, an artificial turf field, and the town hires a consultant to design and get it and put it out to bid, and it gets built. As part of the peer review, the planning board for the site plan would hire Fuss and O'Neill to review that project. And in that case, because the town would have hired the consultant and the town will own that turf field, we may ask you to analyze the artificial grass and the ground-up material underneath it, in addition to the draining and the drainage and traffic flow.
And that's any of the special cases like that is something where you're probably gonna ask for more than what the regulations require. You're gonna ask for a specific specification on what type of, the crumbs they're using and the layers and the fibers and everything else.
I'll see if I can get you on this one. We had a proponent, private, put, and it went through site plan, and it was for a structure that contained a swimming pool. So we never got involved in the pool, because it was inside the building.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, it's an indoor swimming pool. So we didn't get involved in the depth, or the width, the volume, or how it's sanitized.
Right, the whole system, yeah.
We didn't get involved in that at all. But if the town were to build a public pool, like the town of Wayland, for example, has a
Mhm.
town-owned pool, tell me you have a pool on staff, a pool guy on staff.
I do not have a pool guy on staff.
Okay, so you'd have to go,
So we would find, we
Okay,
would
I
find
got-
somebody.
I got him.
You got me.
I got
You
it.
got me. I do not have a pool guy.
the
Or
next one was
Guy
gonna
or
be,
gal or anybody. I have no pool experts. So.
the next one was gonna be a nuclear power plant.
That can't help you there either.
Any other questions or comments? So what's the next step?
Just hoping to get consensus from the planning board that we can give notice to the town administrator that the planning board supports extending Fuss and O'Neill's contract for on-call services.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, we support the request for
Continuing, yeah,
continuing
extending, right.
extending the services of Fuss and O'Neill through, what was it, the next contract?
3
period?
years.
3 years.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Any questions or comments from the public? Is it lonely out there, Dan?
Not when you're sitting up here. It's a little more lonely over there.
Okay. All in favor? 5-0. We'll send that
Thank you
message off to the town administrator, and we'll be still in business. Thanks very
Dan.
much.
Thanks,
It's
Dan.
Good to see you. Was that your pool down at your house? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. No, it's the natatorium at New England, New England School. Yeah, Mike Dukakis natatorium. But towns, the town of Wayland has a pool. It's been there for a long time. Thank you, Dan. Safe trip back. Okay, next item on the agenda, are we skipping down to other business properly before the board? Planners report.
All right, thanks to Sarah's super valuable effort for Tree City USA, we received a notification that Southborough has been approved by the DCR, and for Tree City USA designation.
Wait a minute, wait, go ahead.
And we have to do this every year, but there's a recognition event that will be held May 7th in Needham. One of us will probably attend. If a planning board member would like to join us, they're certainly welcome. We'll give you information on that. They'll be sending us swag materials for, hopefully to use for Arbor Day. We've let the town administrator know through his assistant that we'll need a new proclamation this year, and it will be April 24th, same as the National Arbor Day. Is there something I'm missing?
You received that notification from DCR.
Yep.
Well, what's the next step in Tree City?
DCR approved. It was sent to the Arbor Day Foundation for the final approval.
Yes.
But coordinating with the DCR representative, she's confident that that final approval will come in. So much so that she's sending our swag ahead of time. Usually people receive that at the May 7th recognition event, but I've asked for ours to come in early so that we can have it for the Arbor Day celebration, and she said that she's gonna have that sent over.
So that usually consists of a couple of signs that are posted near the town line,
Yep,
where it will say Tree City, USA,
Yep.
and then the number of years. And each year they, if you sustain your membership, they send you a number, blank years,
yep,
Tree City.
so you can update
And they
it.
also, at least they used to, provide like a banner
Yep,
that you would tie across the main road, Main Street, and it would say that you're a Tree City.
Yep. so we're gonna get a banner, and we're also gonna get a plaque to put somewhere.
Correct. So we're also, just want to point out, I believe that Freddie Gillespie is saying the Open Space Preservation Commission is hosting a Planet Palooza, 50th anniversary celebration of Earth Day, at the library Saturday, April 25th in the afternoon. The exact time is going to still be determined, but maybe noon to 1 o'clock-ish or so. So we'll have some additional swag for that
Yeah.
too. Hopefully we can put something up then.
People there to promote.
Yep.
Recognition.
And to keep on that theme, the Historical Society, Michael Weishan, just planted a Princeton elm next to the Historical Museum on the right-hand side in the vicinity of the tree that we had planted last year that was donated. So on Saturday, he had an event related to the cemetery, and he was going to take some pictures and get some press for that tree planting, which we'll be able to utilize for Tree City USA's application this year.
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
The Board of Selectmen, I believe, is seeking members for Capital Planning Committee. I think that deadline has since passed, March 4th, since I printed that. Park Central is in conservation review right now for stormwater management permit. They've continued to March 26th, so that's still in the works. But they did have an active meeting on March 5th where there was discussion and presentation and review comments from Lucas Environmental and Fuss and O'Neill. A reminder, April 7th, there's a Board of Selectmen meeting where Shopsy and Planning Board has committed to attend to hear a presentation on the House Bill 3507, which is housing initiatives. And then also, it'll be the kind of presentation and final review of the housing production plan prepared by Community Opportunities Group, where the Planning Board has to sign off and the Board of Selectmen have to.
What time of day is that?
6:30.
It's gonna be at 7.
Oh, 7, that's right. The Board of Selectmen's meeting is at 7 that evening. Thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Good.
So 7 PM, April
7
2nd.
PM.
Yep, it's
April 7th.
April 7th.
7th.
Yep, that's it. It's a Board of Selectmen's meeting,
Okay.
starting a little bit later
The
than
last
usual.
Shopsy meeting,
Is-
6:30 was what was discussed. So has that been changed?
Yeah,
with
Vanessa
Dorian as well?
Vanessa Hale came up and said that
Okay.
they're changing it to 7 because they're doing something between
There
6
might be
and
an
7 or
affordable
6:30
housing
and
trust
7.
meeting.
There's something else that they've committed to, so it's gonna be at 7.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Shopsy's meeting on the 23rd of March, just so you know, okay?
What, at 8:30 AM?
It's standard. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Planners report. Moderators meeting, we already discussed.
Was it,
And-
hold on, was it related to what she was talking about, Sam?
Yes,
Mhm.
Yep, Selectman Stivers.
Sam Stivers speaking totally unofficially, but the governor has made an interesting move on the housing choice bill. He's been pushing that for quite a while, unsuccessfully, and it's my understanding that he's now connected that with like $250 million worth of appropriation bill to connect the two, to provide more incentive for people to support the package as opposed to shoot down the housing part of it. So he's pushing very hard to get that whole thing passed, and selectmen have talked sort of indirectly about taking a position on that at some point. So hopefully the April 2nd meeting will provide the information to figure out, does the town want to take a position on that or not? And you can argue that one both ways, but interesting set of dynamics there going on. And the governor's folks seem to believe that there's a good chance that that'll get support this time around. So we'll see what happens. Extra context.
Thank you.
And again, that's April 7th. 7. And that's what I have, planner's report.
Mr. Mills, Mr. Mills.
Oh, you know, I know it's probably not as obvious now that we've had daylight savings, but I've been driving to work very early in the morning and noticed as I go down Route 9 that there are many businesses that still are fully lit and they're not open at 5:30 in the morning. And I was wondering how we as a board or individual or whatever can spark a little review. There's also a new business on Route 9 westbound right before the Wendy's that has a alternating color light over a big piece of granite that I find very distracting.
That granite is
that
right
happens.
on the road, too.
You go by every night. So, as we were talking about some lighting issues this evening, and that kind of jarred my memory on something I thought we should discuss and see how we could maybe remind all the businesses along Route 9 what the code is, if that's our job, or if we need to reach out to someone to say, hey, we're noticing this, how come nothing's happening? Didn't know if I was in the minority on this or a majority. So wanted to bring that up as a discussion item, kind of under the planner's report.
I agree, Mr. Mills. I too have noticed that, but also uplights. There's quite a few lights, not just on Route 9, but throughout the town where the business sign or the business building is being illuminated with lights that shine upward. And they're massive lights on a small or medium-sized sign, so that the amount of light that hits the sign is 100%, and then another 100%, well, not 100%, is, anyways,
Excess.
it overshoots the sign and sends a lot of light upward, kind of in opposition to the dark skies. Go ahead, Marnie.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that our 90% angle that we have in the current bylaw, like many of them exceed that 90% as well. You've mentioned the bright lights, their wall packs, their new wall packs on buildings. So my understanding is the building inspector is, it's her job to enforce that. But I think we could probably help identify those properties.
So, and I'm not trying to go after one specific individual, because I know some of them might be new businesses, and I'm not trying to discourage any of the businesses, but I think a polite reminder to whatever new businesses or ones that are sticking out like a beacon in the night can actually understand what we are looking for to be consistent with others. And to be fair to the businesses that have been here for a long time that are complying, or recently went through the joy of coming before us and having to deal with adjusting their light many times. To be fair to them too, that we're holding others accountable. I think it's only equitable if we do that.
So since we have a selectman here, and the discussion has led to enforcement or lack thereof, and I'm sure what we've heard in the past, that the lack of inspections is a result of a lack of resources, lack of staff, and the building inspector's ability to prioritize. And it seems like these type of things just never reach a high enough priority to get addressed. So since Mr. Stivers is here tonight, maybe he can carry that onto the selectmen's meeting and ask some questions relative to the lack of inspections and what would be needed to make it better. Mr. Stivers.
I'm Sam Stivers again, Board of Selectmen, again speaking very unofficially. I'm happy to carry that message. I have no guarantee that it will have the impact that you intend here. On the other hand, I can remember back the days of yore when I was on the zoning board. I'm pretty sure that there is specific language in the zoning bylaw that says flashing lights are prohibited, clearly. No equivocation. And so, again, in prior life on the zoning board, typically what would happen is someone would actually file a complaint with the building inspector, and at least prior building inspectors felt that it was their obligation to actually pursue a specific complaint versus a general thing that, you know, I think some people in this area are doing things that are inconsistent with the bylaw, et cetera. Why don't you go take a look generally? Didn't usually get much response because of the issue you raise in terms of there's only so much time available for inspections and so forth and doing the stuff to keep the doors open, not much discretionary time. So if you have a specific suggestion, and prior building inspectors have followed up on it, I don't know what the current building inspector feels about that, but it would be potentially worth a question. So, thanks.
One suggestion would be, we all have seen the complete lack of snow this winter, and the snow budget must be bulging at this time of the year. I've had this discussion with other town officials, and we know that when there's money appropriated for one thing and it's not needed, there's always a great ability to find a home for that so-called extra money. And it's got to be a lot of money. Mm-hmm. This is really unprecedented, the amount of the lack of snow that we've had. So we would hope that we know that the town will find a place for that extra money.
I call it lonely money. Is looking for a friend. So.
And we know that DPW is highly capable of, shifting that money into other DPW programs. So, one suggestion would be to take a small portion of that money and for a one-time hire a consultant to do that inspection throughout the town, and make a list of those in non-compliance. As opposed to the example you gave, Sam, which was a single complaint,
right.
And that business owner would say, well, you're picking on me. I drive by all these other guys, and nobody's complaining about
right.
that.
Yeah.
But if you have a list throughout the town, then you're not picking on any individual. You're just noting that this is starting to get out of control,
yep.
And it needs to be addressed. And for I would think relatively small money. It's not a high-tech consultant that you would need to see, which of these.
A survey, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense. Mr. Purple is probably the focal point for that. I will suggest it to him, but others might want to do so as well.
We would hope that in your position it would be more than a suggestion.
I would hope so too, but I've not found that to be true, at least consistently. But anyway, I think good idea. And again, I think that to the snow and ice budget, I think my impression is, and I don't have numbers at my fingertips here, but my impression is we have historically underfunded that and then come back at the end of the year and made some adjustments to build it up to what the actual expenditure was. So I don't think there's as much sitting there as people might expect, but I'm sure that if the weather holds here, there will likely be some money there, and it's a good question in terms of how does that get reallocated. So I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good question. Thanks.
I would hope that the selectmen would know that answer, because it's going to be asked. And,
Yep.
and
Good question.
if the answer from the selectmen is, well, the DPW director is in control and makes that decision relative to where that money goes, then the question will be asked of her. And her priorities should be made known so that people can feel comfortable that it's going in the right direction.
Good question. Again, I don't know the answer to the question, so I'm not suggesting that it goes back to the DPW. I simply don't know, but I will inquire.
Sure. I mean, it's pretty rare that we have what we think is, what did you call it, lonely money?
Lonely money, yeah. Looking for a home.
So we should, when we make, adjustments in other years,
Yep.
so that we don't go in the red, here's a situation where the decision makers should have a plan for that lonely money.
Yep. I mean, there are other instances where people, for example, have salary money and somebody leaves, and so there's a gap between the time a person leaves and the time a person is hired to fill that position. Various departments, in fact, Planning Board had this case a while back where you've got money that's been budgeted and allocated and encumbered but not spent, so there's money that moves around there as well. Typically what happens is that does stay within the departments unless it's a big number, in which case people get more interested in it, I think. But again, it's a good question and I will inquire.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments on this? So, Mr. Mills,
Make a motion, we approve the minutes for February 24th, 2020 as written.
Second for discussion.
motion's been made and seconded. Discussion. Mr. Stein.
Line 203, if I'm not mistaken, the motion was made by Mr. Mills, and I could be mistaken. I do believe it was seconded by Ms. Luttrell. Notice, I don't do that anymore.
Any other questions or comments?
Wait a second. There, Lane.
Some of this discussion at that meeting was kind of all over the place, and I'm really, reading the minutes on those parts of the discussion, I really, Kate, you really do a great job of condensing it and capturing the what we were talking about and kind of trimming off any of that excess stuff that always happens when we're having these kind of all over the place discussions. So I want to compliment you on that. Thank you.
Had I recused myself from Thayer Lane? The only reason why I would have done that is if I'd recused myself.
I don't know you didn't because the count was 5-0.
Okay, all right, yeah, I made the motion.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? 5-0 for the approval of the meeting minutes. Next item on the agenda is our next meeting is going to be on March 23rd. And what we're going to do, if there's no other questions or comments from the public, then we're going to entertain a motion to adjourn, and then the board will immediately, following the open session, go into an executive session. And that vote will be, the vote to go into the executive session will be public. And if that vote carries, then we will clear the room and terminate the TV coverage. So, am I going down the right path here on this?
I'm just not sure if you actually have to adjourn, but I'm not clear on that. I think you do. You do, okay.
So the motion would be to adjourn the open meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
I copied the last one, and we didn't officially adjourn, we just wrote it was not
Following the adjournment?
at 8:36.
Yeah,
You know,
let's
we
do
wrote the
that.
time. This is what we wrote.
So,
That's exactly what we
What we're gonna do then is entertain a motion to go into executive session immediately following our adjournment from the public session.
so moved.
We have to read the reason for us going into executive session, which is, the planning board will enter into executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, Exemption 3, to discuss strategy with respect to pending litigation in the case of Watershed Investment Corp. Versus Planning Board, Land Court Docket Number 19M, is that an I? ISC 000522, where an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the planning board, and the chair so declares not to return to public session. Any questions or comments on?
I second the motion.
So, did you make the motion?
I moved what you did.
Oh, okay, that's right, so moved. So that would be a roll call vote. So Morris, yes?
Mills, yes.
Stein, yes?
Latrell, yes?
Houlihan, yes.
Okay, the motion passes, and we're adjourned from the... We're adjourned from the public session.